Today we are going to present a case on bladder mass. This will be a setting like a examination, a final year urology resident examination, and a student will be presenting a long case. Student, good morning respected examiner. I would like to present the case of Mr. Sharma, a 62-year-old gentleman, a retired bank manager from Varanasi, who presented to our outpatient department with chief complaint of total paleness and intermittent gross hematuria for the last 3 months. Stop there. Paleness gross hematuria in a 68-year-old. What is your immediate thought process? In a patient of this age, paleness gross hematuria is considered bladder cancer until proven otherwise. Other differential diagnoses would include upper tract urothelial carcinoma, renal cell carcinoma, or benign diseases such as urinary stones, trauma, or infections like urinary tuberculosis. Fair enough. Proceed with the history. Sir, Mr. Sharma reports passing clouds occasionally. There are no associated lower urinary tract symptoms like frequency, urgency, or dysuria. He has a significant smoking history of 30 pack years, having quit 5 years ago. He is a known hypertensive, well controlled on medication. There is no significant family history of urological cancer. On general examination, he has a mild pallor but is otherwise stable. Abdominal examination revealed no palpable mass or organomegaly. Digital rectal examination showed a grade 2 prostatomegaly with no palpable bladder base induration. You mentioned a 30 pack year smoking history. How does that influence your thinking and how would you counsel this patient? Sir, smoking is the most important risk factor for bladder cancer, increasing the risk by at least 3 to 4 times. The aromatic amines in tobacco smoke are carcinogenic. Even after quitting, the risk remains elevated for many years. I would counsel him on the direct link between his past smoking and his current presentation and strongly advise against any relapse. For now, the focus is on diagnosis and treatment. You have mentioned the chief complaint. Before you proceed, tell me about the classical triad of symptoms for hematuria. How do you meticulously dissect this single symptom to gather as much information as possible? Sir, certainly, when a patient presents with hematuria, I analyze it on based on three key characteristics. Number one, timing. I ask if the blood is seen at the beginning of urination, that is initial hematuria, at the end, that is terminal hematuria, or throughout the entire stream, that is total hematuria. Initial hematuria often suggests a urethral source. Terminal hematuria points towards the bladder neck or prostate, and total hematuria, as in this case, is more suggestive of source in the bladder or upper tract. The second I will look is the associated pain. I specifically ask if the hematuria is painful or painless. Painless hematuria is highly suspicious for malignancy. Pain is associated with hematuria, often described as colicky flank pain, and would point towards a stone, while a suprapubic pain with dysuria would suggest a infection or cystitis. And the third key factor is appearance. I will ask the patient to describe the color as it is bright red, pink, or Coca-Cola colored. I will also ask about the presence of clots. The presence of large stringy clots suggests an upper tract source, while an amorphous clot are more common with bladder bleeding. For this patient, sir, the history of total painless and intermittent gross hematuria makes urothelial carcinoma of the bladder the top differential diagnosis. You mentioned a smoking history. What are the other key risk factors for bladder cancer? You must specifically ask about in a comprehensive history. Yes, sir. Beyond smoking, which is the single most important factor, I would systematically inquire about several others, such as occupational exposure. I will ask about his entire work history. His specific occupation with known risk factor include in the dye, rubber, leather, textile, and paint industries due to exposure to aromatic amines and aniline dyes. I would ask you, have you even worked in a factory dealing with chemicals, textiles, or leather? Now, the second is chronic irritation or infection. I will ask about any history of chronic or recurrent urinary tract infection, long-term indwelling catheters, bladder stones, as these are associated with increased risk of squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder. I would ask about any prior pelvic radiation therapy for other cancer, example prostate or rectal cancer, or treatment with the chemotherapy agent cyclophosphamide. I would specifically ask about first degree relative with bladder cancer or history of Lynch syndrome, which can increase the risk of urothelial cancer. A personal history of any urothelial cancer, particularly of the upper tract, is a significant risk factor for a subsequent bladder tumor. A good history also involves asking pertinent negatives. What specific negative symptoms would you ask about to help narrow your differential diagnosis, and why are they important? Sir, asking about pertinent negative is crucial to rule out other causes and assess for advanced diseases. I would ask about absence of lower urinary tract symptoms. I would ask about frequency, urgency, nocturia, and a weak stream. The absence of irritative LUTs makes a primary diagnosis. BPH with bleeding less likely, although BPH and bladder cancer often coexist. The absence of significant voiding LUTs is also important. I would ask about unintentional weight loss, loss of appetite, bone pain, or persistent cough. The absence of these B symptoms makes metastatic disease less likely at presentation. Bone pain in particular could indicate bony metastasis. The lack of flank pain makes a primary presentation of an obstructive ureteric stone or renal cell carcinoma less probable. I would ask about any recent falls, injury, or unusual vigorous exercise which can be benign causes of hematuria. You mentioned he is on medication for hypertension. What specific question about his drug history are relevant to this presentation? Sir, when taking a drug history in this context, I would focus on several key areas. First, I would ask if he is taking any blood thinners like aspirin, clopidogrel, warfarin, or any oral anticoagulants. While these drugs do not cause hematuria, they can unmask an underlying lesion by making it bleed more easily. It's important to know this for planning any surgical intervention like TURBT. I will note which antihypertensive he is on. If it's a diuretic, it may contribute to urinary frequency or urgency, which is important baseline information. I would ask about any over the counter supplements, as some of can have anticoagulant properties. Although unlikely, sir, in this patient profile, I would specifically ask about any history of receiving cyclophosphamide, which is a known risk factor for bladder cancer. Now the student has completed taking the history and is now describing the physical examination. You have said that abdominal examination was unremarkable. In a patient with suspected bladder cancer, what specific findings are you looking for during an abdominal exam, even if they are often absent in early stage disease? Sir, even though the abdominal exam is often normal in early bladder cancer, I perform systematically looking for specific signs. I would first inspect the suprapubic area and then gently palpate it. A palpable mass here could indicate a large advanced tumor or a bladder distended due to outlet obstruction from tumor at the bladder neck. Tenderness could suggest inflammation or extravesical extension. I would palpate for hepatomegaly, as the liver is a site for metastasis disease. A firm nodular liver edge could be a significant finding. I would palpate for any enlarged para-aortic lymph nodes, although these are rarely palpable unless they are very large. I would perform a bimanual palpation of both the flanks. A ballotable kidney or flank tenderness suggests hydronephrosis, secondary to a tumor obstructing the ureteric orifice. In this patient, this would be a key step given the ultrasound finding of hydronephrosis. You performed a DRE. What is the specific utility of this examination in the context of a male patient with a bladder tumor? What precisely are you assessing? Sir, the DRE is a critical component of the examination for several reasons. Assessing Assessing the bladder base. The primary goal is to palpate the bladder base through the anterior rectal wall. In a normal examination, the bladder base is not palpable. However, if a tumor has invaded through the bladder wall into the paravesical fat, I might feel a firm nodular or indurated area. This finding would immediately raise suspicion for muscle invasive or locally advanced disease. The DRE allows for assessing of the prostate gland. I would note its size, consistency, and the presence of any nodules. This helps to evaluate for coexisting BPH, which can cause similar LUTs, or for prostate cancer, which can be a concurrent malignancy in a rare advanced cases and invade the bladder directly. I would also assess if the rectal mucosa is mobile over any palpable mass. Fixity of the rectal wall to anterior mass would be very concerning sign for advanced fixed pelvic disease. In a female patient, sir, a similar assessment of bladder mass is done by a bimanual vagino-abdominal examination. Beyond the abdomen, where else do you look for signs of advanced or metastatic bladder cancer, and what would you look for? Sir, to look for evidence of metastatic disease, I would extend the examination to several key areas. I would carefully palpate for lymphadenopathy in the inguinal and supraclavicular region. Enlarged, firm, non-tender inguinal nodes could indicate direct spread or regional lymphatic metastasis. The left supraclavicular fossa for workout node is classical site for metastasis from abdominal malignancy. I would also inspect the lower limbs for unilateral or bilateral edema. Unilateral leg swelling could be caused by an advanced pelvic tumor compressing the iliac veins. Bilateral edema is a more ominous sign of advanced pelvic disease extending to the nodes and vena cava compression. I would look for signs of cachexia such as muscle wasting and significant weight loss, which are non-specific and can indicate advanced malignancy. Pallor may also be present due to chronic blood loss and anemia. You mentioned performing a bimanual exam under anesthesia during the TORBT. How does the information from examination under the anesthesia differ from the office DRE, and why is it considered the most accurate clinical staging tool for assessing the lymph node invasion? Sir, the bimanual examination under anesthesia is superior to an office DRE for several reasons and is a critical step in clinical staging. Under general or spinal anesthesia, the patient abdominal and pelvic floors are completely relaxed. This allows for much deeper and more accurate palpation of the bladder and surrounding pelvic structure than is possible in awake, often tense patient. The exam is performed after the bladder has been completely emptied, bringing the anterior and posterior walls closer together and making any thickening or mass easier to appreciate between the two examining hands, one on the abdomen and other in the rectum, or in case of female in the vagina. A soft mobile bladder on examination suggests non-muscle invasive disease, while a palpable, thickened but mobile mass suggests muscle invasion, a mass that is feels fixed to the pelvic side wall or invades adjacent structure like the prostate or vagina indicates locally advanced extravesical disease, that is T3B or T4. Comparing the exam findings before and after TORBT is also crucial. A palpable mass that resolves completely after resection suggests NMIBC or early MIBC, whereas a persistent mass post resection confirms deep muscle invasion. Routine blood investigation were within the normal limits except for mild anemia. His renal function tests were normal. A urine cytology was sent which came back for positive for high grade urothelial cells. An ultrasound of the kidney ureter bladder region showed a 3 centimeter papillary lesion on the right lateral wall of the bladder. It also accidentally revealed moderate left sided hydronephrosis with a thinning of cortex. The right kidney was normal. Okay, you have two key findings, a bladder mass and a contralateral hydronephrosis. Let's focus on the bladder mass first. What is your next step? Sir, the gold standard next step is a cystoscopy and transurethral resection of the bladder tumor or TURBT. This is both diagnostic and therapeutic. I will perform this under general or spinal anesthesia. Describe the critical steps of proper TURBT as you would explain it to a junior resident. What are you trying to achieve? Refer to the principle taught in Campbell Urology. Sir, as per the principles outlined in the Campbell, a TURBT must be systematic. The goals are to make a definitive diagnosis correctly stage the tumor and completely resect all visible disease. First, a bimanual examination is done to assess for any palpable induration or fixation of the bladder, which might suggest extravesical extension. The entire bladder is inspected to document the tumor size, location, morphology, whether it is papillary or solid sessile, and number. The presence of any satellite lesions or suspicious red patches suggestive of carcinoma in situ is noted. The resection is done fractionally. The exophytic part of the tumor is resected first, followed by the underlying bladder wall. Crucially, a separate deep specimen that include the detrusor muscle must be taken from the tumor base to assess for muscle invasion. This is the most crucial step for staging. Biopsies are taken from the margin of the resection area if cytology was high grade positive or if CIS is suspected. A random biopsy from normal appearing mucosa and the prostatic urethra are also taken. You have a patient with painless gross hematuria. From the moment they walk into your clinic, what is the most logical and efficient sequence of investigation you will order to arrive at diagnosis? Justify your sequence. Sir, the workup must be systematic to evaluate the entire urinary tract. My sequence will be urine analysis and urine cytology. This is the immediate first step. A urine analysis confirms the presence of red blood cells and a urine culture is sent out to rule out infection. Urine cytology is sent concurrently. While not sensitive for low grade tumors, a positive result for high grade cells is highly significant and helps to guide the subsequent cystoscopy. A CT urogram should be scheduled promptly. This is essential to rule out upper tract urothelial cancer or other causes like renal cell carcinoma or stones. It is critical part of the hematuria workup and should be done before any invasive procedure if possible. This cystoscopy is the best definitive diagnostic procedure for the bladder. An office-based flexible cystoscopy allows for direct visualization of the bladder mucosa. If a tumor is seen, the patient is scheduled for formal transurethral resection of bladder tumor in the operating room. This sequence ensures that both the upper tract and lower tract are evaluated efficiently. The non-invasive test, urine studies and imaging provide crucial information before proceeding to the invasive cystoscopy and TURBT. Let's say that CT urograms comes back completely normal. The urine cytology is negative. The patient tells you the bleeding has stopped. Can you now reassure the patient and send them home? Absolutely not, sir. A negative upper tract imaging and a negative cytology do not rule out a bladder cancer, particularly low grade NMIBC. The hematuria from this tumor is often intermittent, and the gold standard for evaluating the bladder is direct visualization. So, the next and most crucial step will be cystoscopy. Guidelines are clear that any patient with gross hematuria requires a cystoscopy regardless of other findings or resolution of symptoms. You have decided to perform a TURBT. You have often heard the phrase, the first TURBT is the most important determinant of a patient's entire disease. Explain what this means. What specific information must the urologist obtain and document during this initial procedure? Sir, that phrase highlights that the initial TURBT is not just a biopsy, it is the primary staging procedure that dictates all subsequent management. A poorly performed TURBT leads to understaging, incomplete resection, and ultimately a worse outcome. To ensure it is proper staging procedure, I must obtain and document the following. Tumor characteristics. The operative note must describe the tumor size, location, number, and morphology, whether it is papillary, solid, or sessile. This is crucial for risk stratification. The most critical event is to provide the pathologist with a specimen from the tumor base that contains the detrusor muscle. The pathologist must comment on whether muscle is present and if so, whether it is invaded by the tumor. The absence of muscle in a T1 specimen mandates a repeat TURBT. I must document the finding of the bimanual exam performed under anesthesia, both before and after the resection. Any palpable induration is highly suggestive of muscle invasion. The report must state whether all visible tumors were resected, I must document if and where any random biopsies of normal appearing mucosa or the prostatic urethra were taken, especially if CIS was suspected. You have completed what appears to be a complete TURBT for papillary tumor that looks like MIBC. Is there anything you should do for the patient immediately in the operating room or recovery area? Yes, sir. For a patient with suspected NMIBC, guidelines recommend the administration of single immediate post-operative instillation of intravesical chemotherapy, typically mitomycin C or gemcitabine. This should be given within 24 hours of the TURBT, ideally within the first few hours. The rationale is to destroy any free floating tumor cells liberated during the resection and to ablate any tiny residual tumor fragments that were not visible. This single dose has been proven to significantly reduce the risk of tumor recurrence. The main contraindication is suspected or known bladder perforation during the TURBT, as the chemotherapy could extravasate and cause severe tissue damage. The first test you are likely to get is a urine sample. Beyond a routine dipstick for blood, you sent a urine cytology. What is the role of urine cytology in the diagnostic algorithm for bladder cancer, and what are its main limitations? Sir, urine cytology involves microscopic examination of exfoliated cells from the urinary tract to look for malignant features. Its primary role is an adjunct to cystoscopy. The main strength of urine cytology is high sensitivity for high-grade tumors and carcinoma in situ. A positive cytology result in the face of normal appearing bladder on cystoscopy should immediately raise suspicion for CIS or upper tract tumors. Its major limitation is its low sensitivity for low grade, well differentiated tumors. These tumors are less likely to shed abnormal looking cells, therefore, a negative cytology results absolutely does not rule out bladder cancer, especially low grade disease. Its interpretation can also be observer dependent. You mentioned cytology. What about other urinary tumor markers like NMP22, Eurovision FISH, or BTI stat? Do they have role in the initial diagnosis of bladder cancer according to current guidelines? Sir, according to current major guidelines, such as those from EAU and AUA, urinary tumor markers are not recommended for routine use in the initial diagnosis of bladder cancer. While some markers have higher sensitivity than cytology, particularly for low-grade tumors, they often suffer from lower specificity, leading to false positive. For example, conditions like infections, stones, or even recent instrumentation can result a positive result. Their primary role is currently limited to specific situations such as surveillance of NMIBC in some context or for adjudicating equivocal cytology results, but they do not replace cystoscopy or cytology for initial hematuria workup. The patient present with hematuria. It is essential to evaluate the entire urinary tract. What is the gold standard imaging modality for this purpose, and what specific information are you looking for? Sir, the gold standard imaging for evaluating the entire urothelium from the renal calyces to the bladder is C2 urogram. It is superior to standard abdominal CT, ultrasound, and IBP. CT urography is performed in multiple phases. First is the non-contrast phase. This phase is excellent for identifying calcification and stones, which can be cause of hematuria or can coexist with tumor. Nephrogenic phase. Nephrogenic phase, after injecting the IV contrast, this phase provides detailed imaging of the renal parenchyma. This is the best phase to detect and characterize renal masses such as renal cell carcinoma. Third phase is the excretory or delayed phase. This is the most critical phase for urothelial evaluation. The contrast filled the collecting system, ureter and bladder and opacifying the urothelium. I am looking for any filling defects which appears as dark spots within the white contrast filled system suggesting a tumor. I am also looking for wall thickening or hydroureteronephrosis that may be caused by an obstructing tumor. In these patients, sir, the CT urography would be critical to investigate the incidental left hydronephrosis and rule out a concurrent upper tract tumor. You have correctly identified flexible cystoscopy and TURBT as key procedure. Standard cystoscopy uses white light. Tell me about an advanced imaging technique that can be used during cystoscopy or TURBT to improve detection and explain its mechanism. Sir, an important advanced technique is blue light cystoscopy, also known as photodynamic diagnosis. About an hour before the procedure, a photosensitizing agent hexaminolevulinate, also known as HAL, or hex, is instilled into the bladder. This agent is preferentially taken up by and accumulate in neoplastic tissue. During the cystoscopy, after initial inspection with the standard white light, the surgeon switches to blue light source. Under the blue light, the HAL in the cancerous tissue fluoresces bright pink or red, while normal tissue appears blue. The advantage of blue light cystoscopy is its ability to increase the detection of tumors, especially flat, difficult to see lesions like CIS, compared to white light cystoscopy alone. Studies have shown that using blue light cystoscopy during TURBT leads to a more complete resection and has been shown to reduce the recurrence rate for patients with NMIBC. It is recommended by guidelines and option to enhance the TURBT, particularly in patients with suspected high risk disease. The TURBT was performed. The pathology report shows specimen 1 exophytic tumor, high grade papillary urothelial carcinoma, specimen 2 tumor base, high grade urothelial carcinoma invading the lamina propria. Detrusor muscle is present and is free of tumor. Random biopsy is negative for malignancy. It, this confirms the diagnosis of high grade T1 in non muscle invasive bladder cancer. So you have PT1 high grade tumor. Is your staging complete? No, sir. For any T1 tumor, especially high grade, a second look TURBT in 4 to 6 weeks is mandatory according to EAU and AUA guidelines. This is to ensure complete resection and rule out understaging. Residual tumor is found in significant number of cases and upstaging to muscle invasive disease can occur. Let's move on. Let's assume that your TURBT shows no residual tumor. Now, do you risk stratify this patient according to the 2024 EAU guideline? Yes, sir. According to the EAU 2024 guideline, this patient falls into the high risk group. The primary factor is the presence of T1 tumor, and this is compounded by the high grade pathology. Other factors for high risk NMIBC include presence of CIS, large tumor size more than 3 cm, and multifocality, some of which are present here. You have received the pathology report. What are the three most critical pieces of information you must find in that report to plan your next step for the non-muscle invasive bladder cancer, and why? Yes, sir. For a TURBT specimen, the three most critical pieces of information are: number one, tumor stage. This is the most important factor as it defines the depth of invasion. Specifically, I need to know if the tumor is confined to the urothelium, has invaded to the lamina propria, or has invaded to the muscularis propria. This is the fundamental distinction between non-muscle invasive and muscle invasive disease, which have completely different pathway. Second factor is the tumor grade. I need to know if the tumor is low grade or high grade based on the cellular characteristic, cytological atypia, architectural abnormalities, and mitotic activity. High grade tumors have a significant risk of progression to muscle invasive disease and requires more aggressive treatment and surveillance. Presence of muscularis propria. The pathologist must explicitly state whether detrusor muscle is present in the specimen provided, particularly in the deep biopsy from the tumor base. If muscle is absent and the tumor is high grade or staged as T1, the staging is considered inadequate and repeat TURBT is mandatory. These three elements, stage, grade, and presence of muscle, are the cornerstone of risk stratification and subsequent management. Describe the pathological difference between TA, T1, and TIS lesion. How would they be described in a pathology report? Yes, sir. All the three are forms of NMIBC, but they differ in their growth pattern and risk profile. TA is non-invasive papillary carcinoma. This is papillary tumor confined to the innermost lining of the bladder urothelium. It has not breached the basement membrane. The report will describe it as papillary urothelial carcinoma, non-invasive. It can be low grade or high grade. T1 tumor. This tumor has grown through the basement membrane and invaded the connective tissue layer beneath the urothelium known as the lamina propria. It has not reached the muscularis propria layer. The report would state urothelial carcinoma invading the lamina propria. T1 tumors are by definition considered to have higher risk of progression than Ta tumors. TIS or carcinoma in situ. This is flat, high-grade, non-invasive lesion. It consists of malignant cells confined within the urothelium. Unlike papillary Ta tumors, it does not form visible fronts. It is always considered high-grade and carries a very high risk of progression to invasive cancer if left untreated. The report would describe it as high-grade urothelial carcinoma in situ. The report of your patient says high-grade urothelial carcinoma. What if it had said urothelial carcinoma with micropapillary features? How would that change your thinking and immediate management, even if it was staged as T1? Sir, the presence of variant histology such as micropapillary, sarcomatoid, or plasmacytoid feature is a major red flag and significantly worsens the prognosis, even in what appears to be NMIBC. Micropapillary variant. This specific variant has a very high propensity for muscle invasion and lymphatic spread, even when the initial TURBT suggests it is only T1. Pathologists often report a high grade rate of upstaging at cystectomy. The changes in the management will be if my patient has T1 tumor having micropapillary features, I would have a very low threshold to recommend an early radical cystectomy, even if the RTURBT is negative. The risk of progression with bladder sparing therapy like BCG is unacceptably high for many of these variants. This is a situation where adhering to standard NMIBC risk table is insufficient and a more aggressive approach is warranted based on the aggressive biology of the variant histology. Distinguish between a clinical stage and a pathological stage in bladder cancer. What is the stage you determined after a TURBT and when does it become a definitive pathological stage? Sir, this is a crucial distinction in oncology. Clinical stage is the best estimate of the extent of the cancer before definitive surgical treatment. It is determined by the combination of physical examination, including bimanual examination, imaging studies like a CT scan, and the TURBT biopsy results. For example, a TURBT showing T1 disease with a negative CT scan would yield a clinical stage of T1N0M0. Pathological stage. This is the more accurate definitive stage determined by the examining entire surgical specimen after it has been removed. For bladder cancer, the definitive pathological stage is assigned only after a radical cystectomy. The stage after a TURBT like PT1 is technically a pathological substage of a clinical staging workup because the entire bladder has not been removed. The definitive pathological stage such as PT3A and 1 can only be known after the cystectomy and lymph node dissection specimen is analyzed by the pathologist. The clinical stage is used to decide if a cystectomy is needed, while the pathological stage provides the most accurate prognosis and guides the decision on adjuvant therapy after cystectomy. Correct. He is high risk. What is the standard of care adjuvant treatment for this patient? Sir, for a high risk NMIBC, the standard of care is adjuvant intravesical therapy with Bacillus calmette-guerin or BCG. He should receive a 6-week induction course of BCG followed by a maintenance therapy. The goal of BCG is to reduce the risk of both recurrence and, more importantly, progression to muscle invasive disease. What if BCG is unavailable due to the global shortage? What are the alternatives for this high risk patient? Sir, the BCG shortage is a significant clinical challenge. For a high risk patient like this, offering an immediate radical cystectomy is an valid option, especially given the T1 high grade nature. However, if the patient desires bladder preservation, alternative intravesical chemotherapy regimes are used. The EAU guidelines suggest that institutional protocol of intravesical therapy could be an option, but BCG is superior. In the US, a combination of intravesical gemcitabine and docetaxel is gaining prominence as a rescue therapy and is being explored in trial as an alternative. Let's say you give him BCG and 6 months into a maintenance therapy. surveillance cystoscopy and cytology shows recurrent high-grade disease. What is this condition called and what is the definitive management? Sir, this would be classified as BCG unresponsive disease. Specifically, it would be a BCG relapsing disease. In a patient with high grade BCG unresponsive disease NMIBC, the standard of care and the recommendation with the highest level of evidence is radical cystectomy with urinary diversion. Further bladder preserving therapies have a lower success rate and risk progression to metastatic disease. Your high risk NMIBC patient has completed an induction course and 1 year of maintenance BCG. Surveillance now shows recurrent high grade TA disease. Define BCG unresponsive disease according to the AUA guidelines and outline the current standard of care and alternative FDA approved option for these specific patients. Sir, the BCG unresponsive disease is a state where high risk MIBC persists or recurs despite adequate BCG therapy. Adequate BCG therapy is defined as at least an initial 6-week induction course plus at least one 3-week maintenance course. This patient with high grade recurrence within 12 months of completing adequate BCG fits the definition of BCG unresponsive. The undisputed gold standard and strongest recommendation for a fit patient with BCG unresponsive high grade NMIBC is radical cystectomy. This offers the highest chance of cure and prevents the progression to metastatic disease. The alternative option for the patient who are unfit or refuses cystectomy having FDA approval are number 1 pembrolizumab. Pembrolizumab is a systemic immunotherapy with anti-PD-1 antibody is approved for patient with BCG unresponsive high risk NMIBC with CIS with or without papillary tumors and who are ineligible for or elect not to undergo cystectomy. The second drug is nadofaragene firaadenovac. This is an intravesical, non-replicating adenovirus vector-based gene therapy that delivers interferon alpha 2b directly to the bladder wall. It is an option for patients with high risk BCG unresponsive NMIBC. Third drug is N803. N803 is nogapendekin alpha in bacicept plus BCG. This is an interleukin 15 agonist that boosts the immune response to BCG. It is approved for use in combination with BCG for this patient population. The choice among these alternatives depends on patient's comorbidities, tumor characteristic, presence of CIS, and patient preference after a thorough discussion of the risk benefit and the continued high risk of progression. Let's change the scenario. The initial TURBT reveals a T2 high-grade urothelial carcinoma. The patient is fit for surgery, but is adamant about preserving their bladder therapy. Describe the concept of trimodal therapy and identify the ideal candidate for this approach based on the 2025 EAU or ISMO guidelines. Sir, the trimodality therapy or TMT is the primary bladder preserving strategy for muscle invasive bladder cancer. It consists of 3 modalities. Number 1, maximum TURBTs to debulk the tumor as much as possible. Number 2 is the radiation therapy to the bladder and the pelvis. And number 3 is the concurrent radiosensitizing chemotherapy. The ideal candidate for TMT who has the best chance of successful outcome comparable to radical cystectomy meets the following criteria. Clinical stage T2 disease, ideally with a unifocal tumor smaller than 5 cm. Pure urothelial carcinoma. The presence of extensive CIS or variant histologies are a relative contraindication. Absence of hydronephrosis, as this indicates a more infiltrative tumor and is a poor prognostic factor for trimodality therapy success. Good baseline bladder function and capacity, and the patient should have undergone seemingly a complete maximal TURBT. A multidisciplinary discussion involving the urologist, radiation oncologist, and medical oncologist is essential. If a check cystoscopy after a TMT shows persistent or recurrent disease, immediate salvage cystectomy is strongly recommended. The standard of care for a fit patient with C2 to C4A N0M0 muscle invasive bladder cancer is neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by radical cystectomy. What is the evidence based rationale for giving chemotherapy before surgery and what is the standard regimen? Sir, the rationale for giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy is twofold and supported by level 1 evidence from multiple randomized controlled trial and meta-analysis. First one is the improved overall survival. It provides a significant survival benefit of approximately 5 to 8% at 5 years compared to cystectomy alone. This is because it treats micrometastatic disease cancer cells that have already escaped the bladder but are too small to detect it on imaging at the earliest possible time. It facilitates pathological downstaging. It can shrink the primary tumor, making the subsequent radical cystectomy technically easier. Achieving a complete pathological response, meaning no residual cancer found in the cystectomy specimen, is a powerful prognostic marker for long term survival. The gold standard regimen is cisplatin based combination chemotherapy, and the most common protocol is dose dense methotrexate, vinblastine, doxorubicin, and cisplatin, also known as DDMVAC, that is with growth factor support, or gemcitabine and cisplatin. The patient must be cisplatin fit, meaning they have adequate renal function, performance status, and minimal hearing loss or neuropathy. A patient present with de novo metastatic urothelial carcinoma. According to the major guidelines update in 2024-2025, what is the new first line standard of care for eligible patients and how has this shifted from the previous paradigm? Sir, the landscape for first line metastatic urothelial carcinoma has been revolutionized by the result of the EV302 or Keynote A39 trial. New standard of care is the first new first line standard of care is cisplatin eligible, and cisplatin eligible patient is the combination of enfortumab vedotin and pembrolizumab. Enfortumab vedotin is an antibody drug conjugate targeting Nectin-4 and pembrolizumab is PD-1 inhibitor. This combination demonstrated a dramatic improvement in both progression-free survival and overall survival compared to platinum-based chemotherapy, nearly doubling the median overall survival. This represents a monumental shift away from the previous standard, which was platinum based chemotherapy. For decades, chemotherapy was unchallenged first line treatment. Now, this chemo free combination has become the preferred treatment for nearly all patients with metastatic urothelial cancer, irrespective of their PD-L1 status or eligibility for cisplatin. Cisplatin-based chemotherapy is now delegated to a secondary role for patients who may not be a candidate for or have access to the EV-pembro combination. Now let's go back to your initial finding of left-sided hydronephrosis. The bladder tumor was on the right. How do you correlate with this finding? Sir, the lack of correlation is suspicious. A right sided tumor is unlikely to cause left sided obstruction unless it is very large and distorting the trigon, which wasn't the case here. The differential for this unilateral hydronephrosis would include a concurrent upper tract urothelial carcinoma of the left ureter, obstruction from a past stone or a stricture, a benign congenital pelvic ureteric junction obstruction. Given his age, UTUC is a primary concern. The next step will be an upper tract evaluation. A CT urogram, which was performed as part of his initial hematuria, would be the ideal imaging modality. In this patient case, the CT urogram showed a dilated renal pelvis with a clear transition point at the pelvic ureteric junction with no filling defect in the ureter or pelvis. This was highly suggestive of a congenital PUGO. A subsequent diuretic renogram was done, which confirmed obstruction with a split renal function of 28% on the left side. As he is asymptomatic and the function is reasonably preserved, the current plan is to manage his high risk bladder cancer first. The PUGO will be managed with surveillance or pyeloplasty if he develops symptoms or decline in function. Your patient has a right-sided bladder tumor, but imaging shows left-sided hydronephrosis. The finding is discordant with the primary lesion. What is the differential diagnosis from this contralateral hydronephrosis from most to least likely in this patient? Sir, in a 68-year-old smoker presenting with hematuria, any abnormality in the urothelium must be considered potentially malignant until proven otherwise. My differential diagnosis for the left side dose will be concurrent upper tract urothelial carcinoma, ureteral stricture, obstructing ureteral stone, and extrinsic compression, congenital PUGO. You have established a strong differential diagnosis with UTUC at the top. You already have a CT urogram that suggests a PUJO-like picture without a visible mass. Are you satisfied with this, or is another investigation required to definitely rule out a small upper tract tumor? Sir, while the CT urogram is highly suggestive of benign PUJO, I am not fully satisfied. A small, flat upper tract tumor or CIS might not create a distinct filling defect on a CT urography. Given the high stakes of missing a UTUC in a patient who already has a high risk bladder cancer, the next essential step is direct visualization by retrograde pyelogram and diagnostic ureteroscopy. During the same anesthetic setting as the TURBT or a subsequent procedure, I will perform a cystoscopy cannulating the left ureteric orifice and perform a retrograde pyelogram. This involves injecting contrast directly into the ureter to precisely delineate the anatomy and any subtle filling defect. Following that, I would pass a flexible or semi-rigid ureteroscope up to the left ureter to the renal pelvis. This allows me to directly inspect the entire urothelial lining. I will take targeted biopsies of any suspicious areas, or if the ureter is clear, perform a selective cytology or barbotage sampling from the renal pelvis to send for analysis. Only after a visually clear ureteroscopy and negative cytology or biopsy can I confidently rule out UTUC. Let's say the ureteroscopy is negative. You proceed with a diuretic renogram to functionally assess this cytonephrosis. The scan shows a split renal function of 28% on the left and T half of 25 minutes after diuretic administration. How do you interpret this finding, and what is your management plan for PUJO? Sir, this finding confirms a functionally significant obstruction of the left kidney. A split renal function of 28% indicates that the left kidney has moderately impaired function but still contributes significantly to the total GFR. A function below 10 to 15% is generally considered a non-salvageable. A T half of greater than 20 minutes is definitive for obstruction. A T half of 25 minutes clearly indicates a lack of adequate drainage. Management plan will be: the immediate priority remains the management of his high risk NMIBC. The BCG installation or other intravesical therapy must proceed as planned. Given the confirmed obstruction and borderline function, this kidney is at risk for further function decline. While he is asymptomatic, no intervention is warranted. The gold standard treatment is pyeloplasty. The timing of the pyeloplasty is debatable. One could argue for doing it after the BCG induction course is complete. Alternatively, given that BCG is an immunotherapy with systemic effect, some might delay the pyeloplasty until after the first year of maintenance therapy is complete. Provided the renal function is stable on serial ultrasound, the decision will be based on balancing the oncological risk from the bladder cancer against the risk of renal deterioration. You now have two significant unrelated urological diagnoses: high risk NMIBC and obstructed left kidney. How does the presence of this solitary functioning right kidney influences your long-term management discussion with the patient regarding his bladder cancer? Sir, the presence of a poorly functioning obstructed contralateral kidney profoundly impacts the long-term strategic thinking, especially concerning the possibility of future radical cystectomy. This patient has a high risk T1 disease. A significant percentage of this patient will eventually fail the BCG therapy and require a radical cystectomy. If he needs a cystectomy, he will only have a good functioning kidney. This makes the choice and health of the urinary diversion critical. An ileal conduit is the most straightforward option. However, creating a new bladder would require a robust GFR and a patient who can manage it well. His borderline overall renal function might make him a less than ideal candidate. The fact that he is essentially living on one kidney makes successful bladder preservation more desirable than ever. We must be very diligent with his BCG therapy and surveillance to maximize the chance of avoiding a cystectomy. This must be discussed upfront with the patient. I would explain that we have two separate problems. We will treat the cancer aggressively to save his life and bladder. However, I must also explain that if the cancer progresses, the big operation cystectomy become necessary, and because his other kidney is weak, it makes that surgery and its aftermath more complex. This underscores the absolute importance of his adherence to the demanding surveillance and treatment schedule for his NMIBC.